47. What Amish girls were never told about their bodies. I learned at 15. The morning light came in gray and thin through the single window above the wash basin. I remember the cold of the floor through my wool socks. I remember the sound of Mama's footsteps moving down the hall toward the kitchen, that familiar, steady rhythm. And then the quiet that followed. I was 15. I was standing very still. Something was happening inside my body, and I had no word for it, not one word. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach, the way you press your palm to a door to feel whether there's warmth on the other side. My name is Sarah, and this channel is a place where I tell the stories that we're never supposed to leave. If you're new here, I'd be glad to have you stay. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And in the comments, I'd love to know, was there something your body did that no one ever prepared you for? I grew up in a Lancaster County community. Old order, plain dressed, quiet lived. We woke before sunrise. We worked with our hands until the light gave out. There was a rhythm to everything: prayer, meals, chores, sleep, and then prayer again. I loved that rhythm once. I still do, in a way that surprises me sometimes. But inside all that order, inside all that careful, faithful structure, there was a silence I didn't recognize as silence for a very long time. I thought it was just the shape of things. I thought every girl everywhere lived the way I did, knowing the world outside herself, and almost nothing about the world within. Our bodies were covered from the time we were small. Long dresses, aprons, the prayer cap on our heads by the age I could remember. There was nothing shameful said about this. It was simply how things were. The body was for work. The body was for bearing children, God willing, when the time came. The body was something you fed, rested, and kept modest. But the body as something to understand, to know the language of, that was never part of the conversation. There was no conversation. There were only the tasks that filled each hour, and the unspoken agreement that certain things did not need to be spoken of. I knew the land better than I knew myself. I knew when the soil wanted more water and when it had taken enough. I knew which of our cows was close to calving by the way she stood. I knew the sound a hinge makes when the barn door is about to give way, and I knew how to fix it. But my own body, that was a territory with no map, and more than that, no permission to want one. That is what I want you to understand. It wasn't only that the information was absent. It was that the asking felt wrong. Like wanting the map was itself a kind of vanity. The Ordnung, the unwritten code that shaped every corner of our lives, never mentioned bodies. Directly, it didn't have to. The Ordnung worked through the air of a room, through the angle of a woman's eyes when you said something too close to the edge. It worked through Gelassenheit, the yielding, the setting aside of self, and somehow, over years of breathing that air, I came to understand that my body was part of the self I was meant to set aside, not to harm it, not to hate it, simply to not dwell, not examine, not question, to accept the vessel and ask nothing of it beyond service. I was 12, maybe 13, when I first went to my mother. I had noticed something, a change. I didn't have words for it, so I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and I said, "Mama, something is different." She didn't stop what she was doing. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the chest near the stairs, and came back with a longer apron, one that sat lower, covered more. She handed it to me. She put her hand briefly on the side of my face, and then she went back to the stove. That was it. That was all. I stood holding the apron, and I understood without being told that the conversation was finished before it had begun. I wore the apron. Of course I did. I folded the question back inside myself the way you fold a letter you decide not to send. And I kept doing that, folding, setting aside for the next 3 years. The body went on doing what bodies do, and I went on pretending I was only a witness to it, not a resident. There was a particular kind of loneliness in that, not sharp, not dramatic, just a low and constant hum, the feeling of being a stranger in the only house you've ever lived in. I didn't call it loneliness then. I didn't call it anything. I had learned by then not to call things names. There was a quilting circle that Mama used to take me to on the first Thursday of every month. I loved those afternoons, the low murmur of women's voices, the smell of the coal stove, the way the light came through the farmhouse windows and lay in warm rectangles across the quilt frame. One afternoon, when I was about 14, my Aunt Ruth, Mama's older sister, a quiet woman with careful hands, went very pale in the middle of a row of stitching. She set down her needle. She excused herself without a word. She was gone perhaps 20 minutes, and when she came back, she sat down and picked up her needle as though she had never left. Every woman in that room looked at her hands. Not one spoke, and I, watching, felt that I had just witnessed something important, though I could not have said what. I turned 15 in October. The leaves had already gone. There was a particular weight to that autumn. Something in me that had been patient for years was growing less so. I had been to singings by then, those Sunday evening gatherings where young people sat across from each other, and the air felt charged in ways I had no language for. I had noticed boys noticing me, and I had noticed my own body noticing them back, and I had folded all of that, too, into the drawer where questions lived. But the drawer was getting full. Something was going to shift. I didn't know yet that it would happen on a Tuesday afternoon in my own kitchen, with jam on the stove and a girl I barely knew sitting at my table. Her name was Claire. She lived a quarter-mile down the road, past the fence line where our property ended and the English world began. She came sometimes to help with the jam her mother had sent her, and Mama had accepted, the way neighbors do. She was 16, maybe 17. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, peeling skins, and she said something, just one sentence. She said it the way you say the time of day, casually, without weight, the way you say things you assume the whole world already knows. One sentence about what my body had been doing for the past 2 years, and I sat very still because the floor had just shifted beneath me. I didn't say anything. I kept my hands moving. That was what you did. You kept your hands moving, and you kept your face arranged, and you did not let what was happening inside you show on the outside. The jam was boiling. The spoon needed stirring, so I stirred. But inside that stillness, something enormous was turning over. It wasn't relief, not first. First, it was a kind of vertigo, the feeling of having walked for 2 years through a dark room, certain the walls were just walls, and then someone hands you a lamp, and you see there was a door the whole time. A door with a name on it, and the name was so simple. Claire didn't notice. Why would she? To her, she had said nothing remarkable. She moved on to the next jar, and the conversation shifted, and she left an hour later with a wave and a smile. She never knew what she had given me that afternoon. I have thought about that many times since, the way the most important things that ever happened to me arrived without ceremony, no trumpet, no preparation. Just a girl peeling skins at a kitchen table, saying words she didn't know were words I had been waiting my whole life to hear. The Gelassenheit held even then. Even in the middle of that earthquake, I yielded. I gave nothing away. That night, I lay in my bed and I thought about Aunt Ruth. I thought about the quilting circle, about the way she had gone pale and left the room, and come back with her face arranged just so. I thought about my mother in the apron. I thought about every older woman I had known, the way they moved through their days with a particular kind of quiet endurance, a patience that I had always read as strength, and lying there in the dark, 15 years old, I understood something that I couldn't have named at 12 or 13. They all knew. Every one of them. They had always known. And they had learned the same way I just had, not from a mother, not from a kind and careful conversation, by accident, in fragments, too late. If this story is touching something in you, not just the Amish part, but the part about receiving your own body like a gift that arrived years after it was sent, please subscribe to this channel. My name is Sarah, and I'm here every week with stories like this one. Leave me a comment below. Tell me, was there something you wish someone had told you sooner? I read every single one. The months that followed were quieter on the outside and louder on the inside. I went to singings, and I knew now a little more of what I was feeling, but knowing and understanding are not the same thing, and understanding and being prepared are further apart still. There were choices I made in those years that I might have made differently, had I been given more, not dramatic choices, small ones, the kind that accumulate, the kind that, looking back, you can trace to a single absence. The absence of a voice that should have been there, sitting beside you saying, "This is how it works. This is what to expect. This is yours to know. That voice never came, so I navigated by instinct. Instinct alone is a poor compass in unmapped country. 2 years after that afternoon with Claire, at a church gathering 3 communities over, an older woman I barely knew pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand as we passed in the doorway. She didn't look at me when she did it. She just kept walking. I opened it later, alone, sitting in the outhouse with the door latched. On it, in careful handwriting, were 4 sentences. 4 plain, simple sentences that told me something about my own body that I had never been told. I wept. Not from pain, from relief so sudden it felt like pain. I kept that paper for 11 years, folded inside the lining of my winter coat, until the coat wore through. I never learned that woman's name. I never thanked her. But she reached across the silence in the only way she knew how, and I have never forgotten it. The women who stayed silent were not cruel women. I want to say that clearly, and I want to say it last, because it is the thing I most needed to understand before I could stop carrying the weight of it. They were girls once, too. Someone handed them a longer apron and went back to the stove. Someone left the room at a quilting circle and came back with their face arranged, and the silence closed over it like water over a stone. The silence wasn't a weapon anyone chose. It was an inheritance, passed down the way you pass down a quilt pattern or a bread recipe, without question, because it was simply how things were done. And if you grew up somewhere that kept you from knowing yourself, not just in Lancaster County, not just in an Amish home, but anywhere, in any house where silence was the answer to the questions your body was asking, then I want you to know this: the not knowing was never your fault. You deserve the words, you deserve the conversation, you still do. The silence was theirs. The knowing now is yours.